I never thought a strip of weathered wood and chain link could become the epicenter of my life's biggest legal battle. But here I was, staring at the empty space where my boundary fence used to stand, feeling my blood pressure spike to dangerous levels. My name is Aaron Jenkins, and I have lived in Clearwater Meadows, Arizona, for 8 years. The subdivision sat on the outskirts of Phoenix, where desert met suburban sprawl in an uncomfortable marriage of beige stucco and drought-resistant landscaping. I bought my 3-bedroom ranch house back in 2017, drawn by the reasonable price and the lot that backed up to undeveloped land. That empty expanse meant privacy, or at least that was what I thought when I signed the papers. The fence had been there when I moved in. Nothing fancy, just a standard 6-foot privacy fence along the sides, and a combination of wood posts and chain link across the back where my property bordered the vacant lot. It defined my space, kept my golden retriever Murphy contained, and gave me the psychological comfort of knowing where my domain ended. I maintained it, replaced a few rotted boards over the years, and never gave it much thought beyond that. Then the HOA changed hands. Clearwater Meadows had always had a homeowners association, one of those necessary evils that came with planned communities. For the first 7 years I lived there, it was run by a rotating board of neighbors who mostly focused on making sure lawns stayed trim and houses did not get painted in offensive colors. The monthly fees were reasonable, the rules were sensible, and everyone coexisted in relative peace. Everything shifted when Patricia Cunningham moved into the neighborhood. Patricia was exactly what you would picture when someone says the word Karen. She was 52, had the kind of blonde highlights that looked expensive but harsh, and wore oversized sunglasses even indoors. She drove a white Mercedes SUV with vanity plates that read "Blessed One," and had made it her personal mission to become HOA president within 3 months of moving in. I first encountered her at a neighborhood meeting in January. She had stood at the podium in the community center, her acrylic nails clicking against the wood as she outlined her vision for Clearwater Meadows. "We need to elevate this community," she had said, her voice carrying that particular pitch that made your teeth ache. "Property values are stagnant because we have allowed standards to slip. I am talking about unkempt yards, outdated fixtures, and unsightly boundaries that make us look like a trailer park rather than the upscale neighborhood we should be." I should have recognized the warning signs then. But I was tired from a long day at work. My contracting business had 3 projects running simultaneously, and I honestly did not think her crusade would affect me. My yard was neat, my house was well maintained, and I kept to myself. I was wrong. The first letter arrived in March. It was on official HOA letterhead, signed by Patricia in her aggressive looping script. "Dear homeowner," it began, always a bad sign when they could not be bothered to use your actual name. "It has come to the attention of the HOA board that your rear boundary fence does not meet current aesthetic standards for Clearwater Meadows. As we prepare for the upcoming renovation of Community View Park, all properties backing the development area must upgrade their fencing to horizontal slat cedar with a minimum height of 6 feet. You have 30 days to comply." I read it 3 times, feeling confusion give way to irritation. Community View Park. I had heard nothing about any park development. The land behind my house had been empty since the subdivision was built. I called my neighbor, Frank Morrison, who had lived in Clearwater Meadows since the first houses went up in 2008. "Yeah, it is Patricia's pet project," Frank said, his gravelly voice heavy with resignation. "She convinced the HOA board to purchase that vacant lot from the original developer. Paid next to nothing for it because it is on a slope and has drainage issues. Now she wants to put in a community gathering space with a ramada and some benches. Says it will boost property values. And she wants me to replace my perfectly good fence because of it. You and 4 other properties on your street. The thing is, Aaron, she does not just want you to replace it. She wants to dictate what kind of fence you put up. I would push back hard on this one. I took Frank's advice. I wrote a formal response to the HOA board, explaining that my current fence was structurally sound, properly maintained, and within all the specifications that had been in place when I purchased the property. I cited the original HOA covenants, which made no mention of specific fencing materials, only height restrictions and upkeep requirements. I sent it certified mail and kept a copy for my records. Patricia showed up at my door 2 days later. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, not waiting for an invitation before stepping past me into my entryway. Murphy bounded up to greet her, tail wagging, but she pushed him away with her knee like he was a piece of furniture. "We need to discuss your response to the board's letter." "There is nothing to discuss," I said, keeping my voice level. "My fence is compliant with the HOA covenants. The old covenants, perhaps, but the board has voted to update our standards. Your chain-link back fence is an eyesore and it is going to block the view from the new park." "Block the view of what? My backyard. That is kind of the point of a fence, Patricia." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "The view of the natural desert landscape beyond your property. The park is meant to be a scenic retreat for the community, and your cheap fencing ruins the aesthetic. We are offering to split the cost of replacement. That is more than generous. I did not ask for your generosity, and I am not replacing a fence that does not need replacing. If the view from your park is so important, plant some oleanders along the fence line. Problem solved." She drew herself up, her nostrils flaring. "This is not a negotiation. The board has the authority to enforce community standards. If you do not comply, we will begin fining you, and those fines will accumulate until you either pay or we place a lien on your property." "Try it," I said. "My fence predates your updated standards, which means I am grandfathered in. Any lawyer would tell you that. Now I have work to do, so if you do not mind." I gestured toward the door. Patricia stared at me for a long moment, her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. Then she turned on her heel and stalked out, her perfume lingering in the air like a threat. I thought that was the end of it. Again, I was wrong. April brought more letters, each one more aggressive than the last. The fine started at $50 per week, then jumped to $100, then $200. I ignored them all and started documenting everything. I took photos of my fence from every angle, printed out copies of the original HOA covenants, and contacted a real estate attorney named David Zimmerman, who had handled my house purchase back in 2017. "You are in the right," David told me during our phone consultation. "The HOA cannot retroactively enforce standards that did not exist when you purchased the property, especially for something as substantial as requiring complete fence replacement. Keep ignoring the fines. If they try to put a lien on your house, we will fight it." I followed his advice, but the situation was eating at me. Every time I pulled into my driveway and saw Patricia's Mercedes parked 3 houses down, my shoulders would tense. Every time I checked the mail and saw another HOA letter, my jaw would clench. The stress was seeping into everything, making me short-tempered at work and restless at night. Then came the morning of April 23rd. I woke up at 6:30, like always, and let Murphy out into the backyard. He usually spent a few minutes sniffing around the perimeter, doing his business, then came back to the door ready for breakfast. But that morning he did not come back. I heard him barking, not his usual alert bark, but something more frantic, more confused. I walked outside in my pajama pants and t-shirt, my bare feet cold against the concrete patio. Murphy was standing in the far corner of the yard where the fence used to meet the property line. I say used to because the fence was gone. Not damaged, not falling down, but completely removed. The posts had been pulled from the ground, the chain link rolled up and hauled away, the wood sections dismantled and vanished. All that remained were holes in the dirt and some disturbed gravel where the fence line had been. For a moment, I just stood there, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Then the anger hit, hot and immediate. I called the police first, then David Zimmerman, then started taking photos. The responding officer was a young guy named Rodriguez who looked barely old enough to shave. He walked the property line with me, making notes on a pad. "Any idea who might have done this?" he asked. "My HOA president," I said flatly. "Patricia Cunningham. We have been in a dispute about this fence for the past month." Rodriguez looked skeptical. "You are saying your HOA president tore down your fence? That seems extreme." "Everything about Patricia Cunningham is extreme. Check your body cam footage. I want this documented." He finished his report, gave me a case number, and said someone from the Property Crimes Division would follow up. I could tell from his tone that he did not think anything would come of it, but at least I had an official police report. David Zimmerman arrived an hour later. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from years of dealing with contentious disputes. He walked the property line twice, took his own photos, and made several calls on his cell phone while standing in my driveway. "This is destruction of property," he said finally. "If the HOA did this, they have crossed a major legal line, but we need to prove it was them. Who else would it be?" I demanded. "I believe you, Aaron, but in court we need evidence. You have any security cameras?" I did not. The neighborhood was generally safe and I had never felt the need. Now I was kicking myself for the oversight. "What about your neighbors? Anyone have cameras that might cover this area?" Frank Morrison had a Ring doorbell, but it faced the street. The neighbors on my other side were an elderly couple who barely used email, let alone security cameras. I was about to say we were out of luck when I remembered something. The house behind me, on the next street over. They had their car broken into last year and installed cameras all around their property. If their back camera has a wide angle, it might have caught something. David nodded. "Go talk to them. Get that footage if you can. In the meantime, I am going to file for an emergency injunction and send a cease and desist letter to the HOA board. This is not over." The house behind mine belonged to the Martinez family. I had only met them a handful of times, usually when Murphy escaped and ended up in their yard. Elena Martinez answered the door, her expression shifting from polite confusion to alarm as I explained what had happened. "Your whole fence is gone," she repeated. "Every bit of it. I know you have security cameras, and I am hoping one of them might have picked up something. The fence would have been visible from your backyard." Elena called her husband Miguel, and they pulled up their security footage on a tablet. It took some scrolling, but we found it. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m. A large white truck with Desert Landscaping Solutions on the side had pulled up to the vacant lot behind my house. 3 men got out and spent the next 90 minutes systematically dismantling my fence. The camera quality was not great in the darkness, but you could clearly see them working, loading the materials into the truck bed and driving away. "Can you send me that footage?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Of course," Miguel said. "This is crazy. Who tears down someone's fence in the middle of the night? Someone who knows exactly what they are doing and thinks they can get away with it," I said grimly. Armed with the video footage, David Zimmerman went on the offensive. He filed a police report addendum with the video evidence, sent formal legal notices to both the HOA board and Desert Landscaping Solutions, and scheduled an emergency meeting with the HOA to demand answers. The meeting was held in the community center on a Thursday evening. I showed up with David, my stomach churning with anger and adrenaline. Patricia sat at the head table with 4 other board members, all of them wearing expressions that ranged from uncomfortable to hostile. "Mr. Jenkins," Patricia began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I understand you are upset about the fence situation, but there is no need for dramatics or legal threats. The board made the decision to remove the non-compliant fencing as part of the park renovation project. You were given ample notice to replace it yourself. Since you refused, we exercised our authority to maintain community standards." David leaned forward. "Mrs. Cunningham, the HOA has no legal authority to remove property that belongs to Mr. Jenkins. That fence was on his land, installed at his expense and maintained by him. What you did is criminal destruction of property, and we have video evidence of the removal." That got a reaction. 2 of the board members exchanged nervous glances. Patricia's smile did not waver. The fence was on the property line, which makes it an HOA matter. "Our covenants give us the right to remove structures that violate community standards." "Show me where in the covenants it says you can destroy a homeowner's property without a court order," David said calmly. "I will wait." Patricia shuffled through some papers, her movements sharp and irritated. "The board voted on this. A vote does not make it legal. You have 48 hours to either replace Mr. Jenkins's fence exactly as it was, or he will be filing a lawsuit for damages, including the cost of replacement, lost property value, and emotional distress. Additionally, we are pursuing criminal charges for property destruction." One of the other board members, a timid man named Gregory Walsh, spoke up. "Patricia, you said the lawyer told us this was within our rights." "It is," Patricia snapped. "What lawyer?" David asked. "I would like their name and contact information." Silence. Patricia's face was flushed now, blotches of red creeping up her neck. "We do not need to justify our actions to you. This meeting is over." "Not quite," I said, speaking for the first time. "You want to talk about property values and community standards. Let me tell you what is going to happen. I am going to rebuild my fence exactly where it was, exactly how it was, and I am billing the HOA for every penny. If you refuse to pay, I will put a lien on the HOA's assets, starting with your precious park land. See how your renovation timeline looks then." Patricia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You cannot do that. Watch me," I said. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. 2 of the board members resigned on the spot, saying they had not signed up for legal battles and property destruction. Gregory Walsh pulled me aside afterward, his face pale. "I did not know she was going to do that," he said quietly. "She told us it was a routine enforcement action." "Most of us have only been on the board for a few months. Patricia runs everything." "Then you need to get control back," I said, "or lawyer up, because this is going to get ugly." It did get ugly. Over the next 2 weeks, the legal volleys flew back and forth. David filed a civil suit against both the HOA and Patricia personally, seeking damages of $15,000 for fence replacement, property damage, and legal fees. The police investigation into Desert Landscaping Solutions revealed that Patricia had paid them in cash. No contract, no paper trail beyond the security footage. The company owner claimed she had told them the fence was on HOA common property and needed to be removed for safety reasons. When confronted with the truth, he lawyered up too. Meanwhile, I hired a fence contractor to rebuild what had been destroyed. I went with the same style and materials, deliberately avoiding the expensive cedar slats Patricia had demanded. The estimate came in at $8,000, higher than the fence was probably worth, but the contractor included rush fees and weekend work to get it done quickly. "You want this up before their park deadline, right?" he asked with a knowing look. "Absolutely," I said. The park project had a hard deadline of June 15th. Patricia had announced it with great fanfare at a community meeting, promising a ribbon-cutting ceremony with local news coverage and everything. The date was important because she had tied it to a matching grant from some local business council that required completion by mid-June. If the park was not done on time, the grant money evaporated. My fence went back up on May 10th. It was beautiful, exactly as it had been, standing tall and proud along my property line. And just like before, it ran right along the boundary where the park was supposed to have its scenic overlook. Patricia showed up at my door within an hour of the last post being set. "You cannot put that fence there," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "It is my property line, my fence, my choice. The park design requires that area to be open. You are sabotaging a community project out of spite. No, Patricia, you destroyed my fence out of spite." "I am just putting things back the way they were. Maybe you should have thought about the park design before you decided to go all vigilante on my property. The grant requires completion by June 15th. If we do not finish because of your fence, you are costing this community $30,000. Then you had better figure out a new design," I said, "because this fence is not going anywhere." She tried everything. She sent more letters, threatened more fines, even suggested she would have the fence removed again. David Zimmerman sent back a response so scorching I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The HOA emergency meeting happened on May 17th. By then, 3 of the 5 board members had resigned, leaving only Patricia and one other person, a nervous woman named Susan Clark, who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. The community center was packed with angry homeowners who had heard about the fence situation and were demanding answers. Frank Morrison stood up first. "Patricia, you have turned this neighborhood into a legal nightmare. We have homeowners getting threatening letters, fines that nobody voted on, and now a lawsuit that is going to drain our HOA funds. You need to resign." "I am not resigning," Patricia said. "I am trying to improve this community, and people like Aaron Jenkins are standing in the way of progress." "Progress?" someone else shouted. "You destroyed his property. The fence was non-compliant, so you become a criminal," Frank shot back. "The police are investigating you, Patricia. You understand that? You hired people to tear down someone's fence in the middle of the night. That is not HOA enforcement. That is a crime." The meeting devolved into shouting. Patricia tried to maintain control, banging a gavel and demanding order, but she had lost the room. Person after person stood up to demand her resignation. Finally, Susan Clark stood, her hands shaking. "I resign from the board, effective immediately. I will not be part of this anymore." That left Patricia as the only board member. Under the HOA bylaws, she could not make quorum by herself, which meant she could not hold votes or take official actions. She was effectively powerless, but she refused to step down. The park project ground to a halt. Without a functioning board, there was no one to approve contractor payments or make decisions about the design changes needed to work around my fence. The June 15th deadline came and went. The grant money disappeared. Patricia's vision of a ribbon-cutting ceremony with news cameras turned into a half-finished ramada sitting on a dirt lot. Meanwhile, the lawsuit moved forward. In June, a judge ruled in my favor on the civil suit, ordering the HOA to pay me $12,000 in damages. Since the HOA had no functioning board and no way to access funds without proper votes and procedures, the judgment hung in limbo. David filed to put a lien on the HOA's assets, specifically the park land that Patricia had been so proud of. That was when things took a darker turn. In early July, Detective Sarah Brennan from the Phoenix Police Property Crimes Division contacted me. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had been investigating the fence destruction case. "Mr. Jenkins, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We have charged Patricia Cunningham with criminal mischief and destruction of property. Both are misdemeanors, but given the value of the damage and the premeditated nature, the prosecutor is pushing for jail time." "Good," I said. "I meant it. There is more. During our investigation, we discovered that Mrs. Cunningham has been misappropriating HOA funds. She paid for the fence removal out of her own pocket, but she has been reimbursing herself from the HOA accounts for various expenses that appear to be personal rather than community-related. We are talking about tens of thousands of dollars over the past 6 months." My jaw dropped. "Are you serious?" "Very. We have turned the evidence over to the fraud division. This is going to expand beyond property destruction. I wanted you to know because you are listed as a witness, and you will likely be called to testify." The case moved through the system slowly, the way legal matters always do. Patricia hired a lawyer, a slick guy in an expensive suit who tried to paint her as a dedicated community volunteer who had made an error in judgment. But the evidence was damning. Bank records, forged signatures on checks, receipts for luxury purchases all charged to the HOA account. The fence situation had opened a door that revealed a much bigger pattern of fraud. In September, Patricia Cunningham stood trial. I sat in the courtroom and watched as prosecutor after prosecutor laid out the case. The fence destruction was just one piece of a larger puzzle of financial crimes. Patricia had been using the HOA as her personal piggy bank, hiding expenses under vague categories like community improvement and administrative costs. The total came to almost $75,000. I testified about the fence, about the threatening letters, about the night the fence was torn down. David Zimmerman testified about the legal battle. The Martinez family testified about the security footage. Alina sat in the witness box and explained how she had watched the video of strange men tearing apart my fence in the dead of night, and how wrong it had felt. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that HOA boards have broad authority and that his client had been acting in what she believed were the community's best interests. The judge was not buying it. "Mrs. Cunningham," Judge Harold Patterson said during the sentencing hearing in October, "you were entrusted with the financial resources and authority of your homeowners association, and you abused that trust repeatedly and deliberately. The fence destruction was not an error in judgment. It was a calculated act of retaliation against a homeowner who dared to question your authority. The financial fraud compounds that breach of trust. This court cannot overlook such behavior." Patricia was sentenced to 18 months in county jail for the fraud charges and 6 months for the property destruction, to be served concurrently. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, though everyone knew that money was long gone. Her husband filed for divorce. 2 weeks later, the HOA itself went into receivership. A court-appointed administrator took over, sorting through the financial mess Patricia had left behind. New board members were elected in November, including Frank Morrison and a retired accountant named Dorothy Huang, who promised transparency and a return to basic community management. One of their first acts was to pay my civil judgment using HOA reserve funds. The check arrived in December, along with a formal letter of apology signed by all 5 new board members. The park land sat empty through the fall and into winter. Eventually, the new board voted to sell it back to a developer at a small profit, using the money to replenish the HOA reserves that Patricia had drained. The developer turned it into 3 new house lots, which honestly was probably a better use of the space anyway. My fence remained exactly where I had rebuilt it, a testament to the fact that sometimes standing your ground is the only option. Murphy still did his perimeter checks every morning, sniffing along the posts and chain link like he was personally inspecting the work. Life in Clearwater Meadows slowly returned to normal, or at least the quiet suburban normal that had existed before Patricia Cunningham arrived. I saw her once after the trial, in early November before she reported to begin her sentence. I was at the grocery store, pushing a cart through the produce section, when I spotted her examining avocados. She looked diminished somehow, smaller than I remembered, her highlighted hair showing dark roots and her expensive clothes replaced with a simple sweater and jeans. Our eyes met across the bins of fruit. For a moment I thought she might say something, might try to apologize or justify or explain. But she just turned away, abandoning her cart and walking quickly toward the exit. I did not feel triumphant watching her go. Mostly, I just felt tired. The whole situation had consumed almost a year of my life, thousands of dollars in legal fees even with the judgment, and an ocean of stress I could have done without. But I also felt something else, vindication. The fence was more than just wood and metal. It was a boundary, a line that said this far and no further. Patricia had thought she could erase that line through sheer force of will and abuse of power. She had been wrong. The neighborhood settled into winter. Holiday decorations went up. The new HOA board organized a low-key community potluck, and people started to trust that their association was not going to turn into an authoritarian nightmare again. Frank Morrison and I stood in his driveway one December evening, watching the sun set over the desert hills that had caused so much trouble. "You think we learned anything from all this?" Frank asked. "We learned that HOA boards need oversight," I said, "and that nobody should have unchecked power over their neighbors' homes." "You think it will stick?" I shrugged. "For a while, until people forget and someone else decides they know best how everyone should live." Cynical. "Realistic," I corrected. "But for now, at least we have good people in charge. That is all you can ask for," Frank nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "Your fence looks good, by the way," I smiled. "Yeah, it really does." The legal aftermath continued into the new year. Patricia's criminal restitution was handled through the court system, with her wages garnished once she got out of jail. She would be paying back the HOA for years, probably decades. The civil judgment against her personally was separate, and David Zimmerman had placed liens on what few assets she had left. Her house went into foreclosure in January, and she moved out of Clearwater Meadows entirely. I did not follow where she went. I had spent enough time and energy on Patricia Cunningham. The Desert Landscaping Solutions owner ended up settling out of court with the HOA for his role in the fence destruction. He paid a fine and agreed to never work in Clearwater Meadows again. His company took a reputation hit from the whole situation, which seemed fair given that he had torn down someone's fence based on nothing but Patricia's word. My own life slowly got back to normal. Work picked up as winter turned to spring, with 3 new construction projects and a kitchen renovation that kept me busy 6 days a week. Murphy turned 8 and started going gray around his muzzle, but he still did his morning fence inspections with the dedication of a border patrol agent. I dated a woman named Jennifer for a few months, a teacher I met at a friend's barbecue. She found the whole fence saga hilarious in a dark comedy kind of way. "You went to war over a fence," she said one night, shaking her head. "That is the most suburban thing I have ever heard." It was not about the fence, I tried to explain. It was about someone thinking they could just take what was mine because they did not like it. "I know," she said, squeezing my hand. "I am just giving you grief. You did the right thing standing up to her. Most people would have just caved." Jennifer and I did not work out long term, but we parted as friends. The fence story became one of those anecdotes I would tell at parties, usually edited down to the highlights. People always reacted the same way: shock at Patricia's audacity, satisfaction at her arrest, and fascination with the legal process that had unfolded. "You should write a book about it," someone suggested at a 4th of July cookout. "Nobody would believe it," I said. "It sounds too crazy to be real." But it was real. Every absurd, stressful, infuriating moment of it. The new HOA board proved to be everything Patricia was not: transparent, reasonable, and focused on actual community needs rather than personal vanity projects. They published monthly financial reports, held regular open meetings, and established clear procedures for enforcement actions that required multiple board votes and opportunities for homeowners to respond before any fines were issued. Dorothy Huang, the retired accountant who had become board treasurer, implemented a system of checks and balances that made it nearly impossible for one person to control the finances. Every expenditure over $500 required 2 signatures. Bank statements were reviewed at monthly meetings. An independent audit was conducted annually. "We are not going to let what happened with Patricia happen again," Dorothy told me at a neighborhood meeting. "This community deserves better." The meeting was in April, almost exactly a year after my fence had been torn down. I sat in the community center and looked around at my neighbors, people I had lived near for 8 years, but had not really known until this whole situation forced us together. We had formed a kind of bond through the shared trauma of Patricia's reign, a collective understanding that we had survived something toxic and come out the other side. Frank Morrison stood up during the open comment period. "I want to recognize Aaron Jenkins," he said, and I felt my face flush as heads turned toward me. A lot of us were angry about what Patricia did, but Aaron was the one who actually fought back. He could have just replaced his fence, paid the extortion, and kept his head down. Instead, he stood his ground, and that exposed the fraud and abuse that was happening. This neighborhood is better because he refused to be pushed around. People applauded. It was embarrassing and gratifying at the same time. I gave a little wave and tried to disappear into my chair. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to thank me personally. Some of them had their own stories of Patricia's bullying, demands that they repaint their houses or replace their mailboxes or tear out landscaping that she deemed non-compliant. None of it had risen to the level of fence destruction, but the pattern was clear. Patricia had been building her little fiefdom, one intimidated homeowner at a time. She sent me 4 letters about my rose bushes, an elderly woman named Grace Abernathy told me. Said they were overgrown and violated the height restrictions. They were 2 feet tall. I was so stressed about it I almost dug them out, but then your situation happened and the board collapsed. My roses are still there and they are beautiful. Stories like that put things in perspective. The fence had been my battle, but it had been a proxy war for something bigger: the right to live in your own home without someone else dictating every detail of your life. Spring turned to summer. The empty lot where the park was supposed to be got sold to the developer, who broke ground on the new houses in June. I watched the construction from my backyard, Murphy lying at my feet, and thought about how different things could have been. If I had just complied, replaced my fence with expensive cedar slats, kept quiet and paid whatever Patricia demanded, would the fraud have been exposed? Would she have continued unchecked, growing bolder and more brazen until she finally crossed a line someone else could not ignore? Maybe. Or maybe she would have just continued indefinitely, a petty tyrant ruling over a suburban kingdom. The 3 new houses went up quickly, modern builds with stone accents and desert landscaping. Young families moved in, drawn by the good schools and reasonable HOA fees that the new board had actually lowered after cleaning up Patricia's financial mess. I met one of the new neighbors, a guy named Marcus Patterson with 2 kids and a black lab named Duke. "What is the neighborhood like?" he asked as our dogs sniffed each other through my fence. "Quiet," I said. "Drama-free, at least lately. Good people, reasonable HOA. You picked a good time to move in." We almost bought in a different subdivision, but the HOA there had crazy rules. No street parking, no play equipment in yards, no political signs. This place seemed way more chill. "It is now," I said. "Trust me, it is now." I did not tell him the whole story. He would hear it eventually, the neighborhood legend of Patricia Cunningham and the Great Fence War. Stories like that took on a life of their own. In August, I got a letter from the Arizona Department of Corrections. Patricia Cunningham had been released early for good behavior, having served 11 months of her sentence. She was on probation for 3 years and had to continue making restitution payments. The letter was just a notification, required because I had been listed as a victim in her case. I filed the letter away and did not give it much thought. Patricia was someone else's problem now. Life continued its steady rhythm. Work stayed busy. Murphy got older. The seasons changed in the subtle way they do in Arizona, where summer heat gives way to fall warmth, and then winter mildness. I replaced the boards on my deck, planted some native grasses along the fence line, and took a weekend trip to Sedona just to get away. The 2nd anniversary of the fence incident passed without fanfare. I marked it privately, standing in my backyard on an April morning and looking at the fence that had caused so much chaos. It was weathering nicely, the wood taking on a silver patina and the chain link posts steady and straight. Murphy did his inspection, marked his territory on the corner post, and trotted back to me for his morning treat. "Good fence," I told him, and he wagged his tail in agreement. The HOA board had stabilized completely by then. New families continued moving in, drawn by reasonable rules and transparent governance. Property values actually increased, not because of any fancy park or stringent aesthetic requirements, but because people wanted to live in a neighborhood that was not run by a tyrant. Dorothy Huang stepped down as treasurer after 2 years, satisfied that the systems she had put in place would hold. Frank Morrison took over, his contractor background making him perfect for overseeing community maintenance projects. The board approved a budget to repaint the community center, fix some drainage issues on the common property, and establish a small emergency fund for unexpected repairs. It was boring, responsible governance. It was exactly what an HOA should be. I ran into Gregory Walsh, one of the original board members who had resigned during the fence crisis, at a hardware store in September. He was buying supplies for a bathroom renovation and looked embarrassed when he saw me. "Aaron," he said, shifting his weight awkwardly. "How are you doing?" "Good, Greg. You?" "Good, yeah. Listen, I wanted to say I am sorry about how everything went down. I should have pushed back harder against Patricia. I knew the fence thing was wrong, but I convinced myself it was not my problem." "You resigned when it mattered," I said. "That took guts." He shook his head. "Not really. I should have stood up earlier, would have saved everyone a lot of trouble. Maybe, or maybe Patricia would have just steamrolled you two. She was pretty determined. Still, I think about it sometimes, how different things could have been if the board had reined her in from the start. We talked for a few more minutes, the conversation easier than I expected. Greg was carrying genuine guilt about the situation, even though he had not been one of the main actors. That seemed to be a common thread among the people who had been tangentially involved. They all wished they had done more, said more, resisted more. I understood the impulse. Hindsight made everything clear. But in the moment, when Patricia was in full force with her letters and her threats and her absolute certainty that she was right, standing up to her took a kind of energy most people did not have in them. Life was busy, and HOA disputes seemed like such a small thing in the grand scheme. Why make waves over a fence or rose bushes or the color of your mailbox? Because small tyrannies grew into large ones if left unchecked. That was the lesson I had learned. The third year after the fence incident brought changes. I started dating again, this time a woman named Victoria Zimmerman, no relation to my lawyer David. Victoria was a nurse at Phoenix General, with dark curly hair and a laugh that made my chest feel light. We met at a friend's wedding and hit it off immediately. She knew about the fence saga before we even went on our first date. "You are fence guy," she said with a grin. "My friend Jessica lives in your neighborhood. She told me you went full legal warfare on your HOA." "That is one way to put it," I admitted. "I think it is great. My parents got pushed around by their HOA for years. Stupid fines, arbitrary rules, nobody ever fighting back. You actually did something about it." Victoria became a regular presence in my life. She loved Murphy, tolerated my long work hours, and brought a sense of fun that I had not realized I was missing. We took weekend trips, tried new restaurants, and fell into an easy partnership that felt right. She moved in during the spring of the fourth year, her stuff blending with mine in a way that made my house feel like an actual home. We talked about marriage in the vague way couples do when they are testing the waters, and I found myself thinking about the future in concrete terms for the first time in years. Life was good. The fence stood strong, the neighborhood thrived under reasonable leadership, and I had built something real with Victoria. The chaos of the Patricia years felt distant, like a bad dream that had finally faded. Then, in June of that year, I got a phone call from Dorothy Huang. "Aaron, I wanted to give you a heads up about something," she said, her voice serious. "Patricia Cunningham filed a petition to have her criminal record expunged. She is arguing that she has paid her restitution, served her time, and deserves a clean slate." My stomach tightened. Can she do that? "She can file the petition. Whether it gets granted is up to a judge. There will be a hearing and victims can submit statements. I thought you should know in case you want to be involved." I talked it over with Victoria that night. Part of me wanted to let it go, to let Patricia fade into the past where she belonged. But another part, the part that had fought so hard 4 years ago, knew I could not just ignore it. "If you think it matters, you should do it," Victoria said. "But if you are only doing it out of anger, maybe let it go." "I do not know what I am doing it out of," I admitted. "I just know that she destroyed something that was mine, stole from an entire community, and now wants to pretend it never happened. Then write your statement. Let the judge decide." I spent 2 evenings crafting a victim impact statement. I outlined what had happened, the stress and financial cost of fighting back, the larger pattern of abuse that the fence incident had exposed. I kept it factual, avoiding emotional language or personal attacks. I wanted the judge to understand the reality of what Patricia had done, not just the sanitized version her lawyers would present. The hearing was in August. I took a day off work and drove to the courthouse downtown, the same building where Patricia had been sentenced 4 years earlier. The courtroom was different this time, smaller and less formal, but the weight of it felt the same. Patricia was there with her lawyer, wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup. She looked older, her face lined in a way I did not remember. When her eyes met mine across the courtroom, there was a flicker of something, recognition maybe, or resentment. Then she looked away. The hearing was procedural and dry. Patricia's lawyer argued that his client had completed all the terms of her sentence, paid thousands in restitution, and had been a model probationer. She had attended counseling, completed community service, and stayed out of legal trouble. She deserved a second chance, a clean record that would allow her to move forward with her life. The prosecutor countered with a recitation of Patricia's crimes, the deliberate nature of the fence destruction, the systematic fraud she had perpetrated. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment but a calculated pattern of abuse. Then it was time for victim statements. I was called to the stand, sworn in, and asked to present my statement. I read from the paper in front of me, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Your Honor, Patricia Cunningham destroyed my property in the middle of the night as retaliation for my refusal to comply with unreasonable demands. That destruction cost me time, money, and peace of mind. But more than that, it exposed a pattern of financial fraud and abuse of power that affected an entire community. People trusted her with their HOA funds and their faith in fair governance, and she violated that trust repeatedly. Expunging her record does not change what she did. It only erases the public acknowledgement of those actions. I believe that record should stand, not as punishment, but as a reminder that actions have consequences, even for people who think they are above the rules. I sat down, my hands shaking slightly. Dorothy Huang gave her own statement, shorter but equally firm. Then the judge asked Patricia if she wanted to address the court. She stood, her lawyer at her side. Your Honor, I know I made mistakes. I let my desire to improve the community cloud my judgment. I acted impulsively and hurt people in the process. I have spent the last 4 years trying to make amends, paying back what I took and working to be a better person. I am not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to move forward without this record following me for the rest of my life. It was a good speech, probably written by her lawyer, but it rang hollow to me. There was no acknowledgement of the deliberate cruelty of the fence destruction, no real understanding of the betrayal she had committed against her neighbors. The judge took a week to make her decision. When the ruling came down, it was a denial. Judge Martha Reynolds wrote that while Patricia had completed the technical requirements for expungement, the nature and scope of her crimes warranted a record that reflected the seriousness of her actions. The expungement was denied without prejudice, meaning Patricia could apply again in a few years, but for now the record would stand. Dorothy called to tell me the news. You did good, Aaron. Your statement mattered. I hope so, I said. Mostly I just hope she stays far away from here. I think she got the message. From what I hear, she is living somewhere in Tucson now. New city, new start. Maybe she will actually learn something from all this. Maybe. But I was not holding my breath. Life rolled on. Victoria and I got engaged in October. A simple proposal on a hiking trail in the Superstition Mountains with Murphy as our witness. We set a wedding date for the following spring, a small ceremony in our backyard with close friends and family. The neighborhood continued to thrive. The houses built on the old park lot were occupied by good neighbors who integrated into the community seamlessly. The HOA board remained stable, with elections that drew actual interest and participation from residents who had learned the importance of paying attention to who governed their neighborhood. Frank Morrison and I became close friends, the kind forged through shared adversity. We grabbed beers on Friday evenings, complained about work, and occasionally reminisced about the fence war in the way veterans talk about old battles. "You think it was worth it?" Frank asked one night, sitting on my back patio with Murphy sprawled between us. "All the stress and the legal fees and the time." I looked at the fence, still standing strong after all these years. "Yeah," I said, "it was worth it. Not because of the fence itself, but because we stopped something bigger. Patricia would have kept going if someone had not pushed back. The fraud, the bullying, all of it would have continued. So yeah, it was worth it. Ever regret it, even a little? Sometimes I regret that it had to happen at all, that we had to go through all that just to protect what was already ours. But do I regret fighting? No, never." Frank nodded, taking a long pull from his beer. "Good, because you are kind of a neighborhood legend now. Kids will tell stories about the great fence battle of Clearwater Meadows." I laughed. "That is a terrifying thought. Terrifying but true." The wedding happened in April, 5 years after the fence was first torn down. Victoria walked through the gate in that fence, the same one that had caused so much trouble, and joined me under an arch we had set up in the backyard. Murphy wore a bow tie and served as our ring bearer, taking his duties very seriously. It was a perfect day, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of desert flowers. Our friends and family filled the yard, spilling out past the fence line into the grassy area beyond. At one point during the reception, I stood by that fence with a glass of champagne and thought about everything it represented. Not just a boundary, but a principle. Not just wood and metal, but a refusal to be pushed around. Victoria came up beside me, her hand slipping into mine. "What are you thinking about?" "How we almost did not make it here," I said. "If I had let Patricia win, if I had torn down the fence and rebuilt it her way, I do not think I would have ever felt like this house was really mine." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," she said. "You fought for your home, for our home now. That matters." She was right. It did matter. The years that followed were good ones. Victoria and I settled into married life with the ease of people who genuinely liked each other. We added a second dog, a rescue mutt named Sadie who bonded with Murphy immediately. Work stayed steady, with my contracting business growing enough that I hired 2 full-time employees. The fence aged gracefully, weathering storms and summer heat and the occasional bump from a wayward soccer ball. I repaired it when needed, replaced a few posts that rotted, but mostly it just stood there doing its job, marking the boundary, keeping Murphy and Sadie contained, reminding me that some battles are worth fighting. Patricia Cunningham faded into a cautionary tale, the kind of story told at HOA meetings to illustrate what not to do. New residents heard about her in whispered conversations and wide-eyed disbelief. The older residents who had lived through it mostly just shook their heads and felt grateful it was over. I never saw her again after that courthouse hearing. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had remarried, that she worked some administrative job in Tucson, that she kept a low profile. Good for her, I supposed. Everyone deserved a chance at redemption, even if I remained skeptical of hers. The HOA continued to function exactly as it should, quietly, efficiently, and without drama. Monthly fees stayed reasonable, common areas stayed maintained, and disputes were handled through rational conversation rather than midnight property destruction. It was boring in the best possible way. Frank Morrison eventually stepped down from the board, satisfied that the systems we had built would outlast any one person's tenure. A younger couple took over, bringing fresh energy and ideas, while respecting the boundaries and processes that kept things stable. Murphy passed away when he was 12, his old body finally giving out on a quiet Tuesday morning. Victoria and I buried him in the backyard, near the fence he had patrolled so faithfully. Sadie mourned him for weeks, looking for him in his favorite spots and whining at the back door. We got a puppy 6 months later, a golden retriever like Murphy had been. We named him Ranger, and he took to the yard with the same enthusiasm Murphy had shown. His favorite spot was the back corner, where he would stand with his nose pressed to the chain link, watching the world beyond with intense concentration. Life had come full circle. The fence that had once been the center of a legal war was now just a fence again, unremarkable and ordinary. But it held a significance that only those of us who had lived through the battle could fully understand. On the 10-year anniversary of the original fence destruction, Frank organized a small neighborhood gathering at our house. It was not a party exactly, more of a commemoration of what we had all been through and how far we had come. People brought food, told stories, and laughed about things that had not been funny at the time. Dorothy Huang raised a glass. To Aaron, who taught us that standing up for what is right matters even when it is hard, and to this fence, which has seen some things. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses. I felt Victoria's hand squeeze mine, felt the warmth of being surrounded by people who understood. To the fence, I said, raising my own glass. May it stand for another 10 years and never cause this much trouble again. Here, here, Frank agreed. We spent the evening in the backyard, kids running around, dogs playing, adults swapping stories and enjoying the mild spring weather. At one point, I found myself standing by the fence alone, running my hand along one of the posts. It felt solid, permanent, real. Patricia Cunningham had thought she could erase it, could impose her will through force and intimidation. She had been wrong. The fence had outlasted her reign, her fraud, her entire presence in Clearwater Meadows. It stood as a testament to the fact that property rights matter, that boundaries matter, that fighting back against bullies matters. I thought about all the people over the years who had faced similar situations, HOA tyrants who used their small amount of power to make life miserable for their neighbors. Some of them fought back. Many did not, choosing to avoid the stress and the cost and the drama. I did not judge them for that choice. Everyone had to decide which battles were worth fighting, but I was glad I had fought mine, not just for the fence itself, but for everything it represented. The right to live in your home without someone else dictating every detail. The right to push back against unreasonable demands. The right to say no, and to make that no stick even when someone with a title and a clipboard tried to override it. The neighborhood had been changed by the whole experience, made stronger in some ways and more cautious in others. People paid attention to HOA elections now, read the bylaws, asked questions about finances and decisions. The old apathy was gone, replaced by an engaged vigilance that kept boards honest and prevented any one person from accumulating too much power. It was a good legacy, I thought. Better than any park or scenic overlook could have been. As the evening wound down and guests started to leave, Victoria and I stood on the back patio watching the sun set over the desert. Ranger was sprawled at our feet, exhausted from playing. The fence stood silhouetted against the orange sky, casting long shadows across the yard. "You ever think about what your life would be like if none of this had happened?" Victoria asked. "Sometimes," I admitted. "I would have a lot more money in savings, that is for sure, and a lot less stress. But you would not have met all these people. Frank, Dorothy, even me in a roundabout way. The neighborhood would not be what it is now." "True. So I guess I am saying that even though it was hell while it was happening, I would not change it. The fence stands. Patricia is gone. We won. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, Victoria said softly. We stood there until the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink. Then we went inside, locking the door behind us and leaving the fence to stand guard through another night. It was just a fence, wood and chain link and metal posts. But it was also so much more than that. It was a line drawn in the sand, a refusal to be pushed around, a victory earned through persistence and principle. And it would stand for as long as I owned this house, a quiet reminder that some battles are worth fighting, no matter the cost.